What is the true measure of a currency? Is it the precious metal from which it is forged, or the terrifying weight of what it costs to possess it? Before us lies an artifact that rejects all standard metrics of wealth. The sole survivor of a lost reality where commerce required a far more intimate sacrifice. Let us break the seal on the containment unit and document what remains. The object resting on the specialized gravimetric isolation pad is, structurally speaking, a coin. It measures exactly 3 centimeters in diameter and weighs precisely 45 grams. Yet, any attempt to classify it within standard numismatics immediately fails. Spectrographic analysis reveals that this artifact, which we have designated the Blank Obol, is not struck from gold, silver, or any recognizable carbon-forged alloy. It is comprised of a hyper-dense, frictionless metamaterial that actively devours ambient photons. Observe the object as the containment field's overhead lighting washes across it. There is no glint, no reflection, and no shadow cast beneath it. To the naked eye, it does not look like a physical disk, but rather a perfectly circular hole punched directly through our 3-dimensional space. Furthermore, note the absolute lack of iconography. Traditional coinage utilizes struck imagery to establish authority, guarantee weight, and deter counterfeiting. The Blank Obol possesses no milled edge, no sovereign profile, and no stamped denomination. It is entirely, aggressively blank. When our robotic manipulators attempt to grip the coin, we encounter a profound physical anomaly. The alloy possesses a coefficient of friction that registers at absolute zero. It slips through standard titanium calipers as if lubricated by an imperceptible etheric field. To manipulate the obol for examination requires the use of precisely calibrated, opposing magnetic fields. If one were to place it on a perfectly level surface, the ambient kinetic vibrations of the room's atmospheric pressure would send it sliding indefinitely. It is also unnaturally cold, not the passive chill of inert metal, but an active, parasitic void that rapidly leaches thermal energy from the air around it, creating microfrost patterns on the glass of the containment unit. To understand why a civilization would forge a currency that actively resists being held, we must examine the provenance of its recovery. This obol was extracted from an expansive archaeological site designated as the Ashen Exchange. Orbital cartographic data reveals this was once a planetary-scale commercial hub, an interconnected megalopolis of towering, hyper-geometric arcologies and sprawling bizarre terraces. The specific excavation zone was a massive, petrified transit corridor, a multi-lane tollgate separating the upper administrative spires from the lower industrial sprawl. The stratigraphy of the Ashen Exchange is remarkably undisturbed. There is no evidence of orbital bombardment, no ash layer from volcanic activity, and no tectonic trauma. The architecture is pristine, yet the thoroughfares are choked with the desiccated, petrified husks of millions of citizens, frozen mid-stride in the routine act of paying a toll. I find it deeply unsettling to observe the high-resolution macro photography of the coin's surface on the secondary monitor. While it appears flawlessly smooth to our optical senses, a deep penetration ether resonance scan reveals a turbulent, complex internal geometry. The obol is not solid. It is a hollow, microscopic vacuum chamber, humming with an intense, negative psychic resonance. It was not designed to passively represent a fractional unit of state wealth. It was engineered to aggressively contain an abstract value. The physical evidence suggests this frictionless disk is not a static measure of goods, but an empty vessel, hungry to be filled. Moving beyond the frictionless physical impossibility of the Blank Obol, we must confront the horrifying macroeconomic principles of its use. In standard models of commerce across the multiverse, currency represents a fractional promise of labor or state-held commodities. It is an external abstraction. However, for the citizens of the Ashen Exchange, commerce was not a transaction of external wealth. It was an act of existential amputation. Observe the microscopic toll receptacles recovered from the transit corridors. As seen in the polarized light scan on reference plate 3, the slots are not designed to mechanically sort coins by weight or diameter. They are lined with a bioreactive, hyperconductive filament. When we place a Blank Obol into the receptacle and introduce a synthesized solution of artificial psychic residue, the reaction is immediate and violent. The frictionless vacuum within the coin rapidly siphons the residue, drawing it into its internal geometry with an audible, high-frequency hiss. By decoding the syntactical warnings etched into the petrified turnstiles of the exchange, we translated the core economic doctrine. The script is brutally utilitarian, lacking any religious or sovereign preamble. The syntax relies on deep, angular incisions that denote permanent removal, The primary glyph sequence, repeated across every commercial surface in the megalopolis, translates precisely as value is derived from the weight of what is surrendered. This civilization did not trade in gold, nor did they utilize fiat data credits. They traded in subjective human experience. The blank obol is exactly that, blank, until it is physically held by a conscious entity. Through the ether-resonant mechanics of the metamaterial, gripping the coin initiates a localized synaptic siphon. The user must intentionally focus on a specific memory, a profound emotion, or a learned technical skill, and push it into the vacuum of the coin. The more profound the memory, the greater the etheric mass it imparts to the obol, and therefore, the higher its purchasing power. When I attempt to handle the coin using heavily insulated telepresence gauntlets, the laboratory senses still register a phantom, drawing sensation, a psychic undertow attempting to pull the data directly from my own localized consciousness. It is a strictly predatory currency. Consider the terrifying calculus of a daily commute in such a society. To pass through the toll gates from the lower industrial sprawl to the administrative arcologies required a literal payment of identity. A citizen might pay for their morning transit with the memory of their first childhood rainfall. To purchase vital sustenance, they might be forced to surrender the tactile memory of a lover's face. The coin absorbs the neural pathway entirely, permanently excising it from the user's biological architecture. Once the transaction is complete, the memory is irrevocably gone. It is harvested, held within the Ashen Exchange's central economic reservoirs, commodified, traded, and perhaps consumed as digital narcotics by the ruling elite. The archival telemetry suggests that when an obol is charged with a memory, its physical properties fundamentally alter. It ceases to be a frictionless, light-devouring void. Instead, a filled obol glows with a soft, bioluminescent hum, its surface temporarily swirling with the refracted emotional spectrum of the harvested memory. It gains fractional, quantifiable mass. However, once the coin is deposited into a receptacle and the central arcology extracts the data, the obol is immediately flushed back to its blank, frictionless state. It drops back into circulation as a hungry, empty vessel, ready to consume another fragment of a life. I find the psychological implications of this hyper-capitalist extreme to be devastating. We are looking at a society that literally spent itself to survive. The working class would inevitably face a terrifying point of diminishing cognitive returns. As their most precious, foundational memories were systematically spent on basic biological necessities, they would be forced to surrender increasingly vital functions: how to read complex syntax, how to navigate their own neighborhoods, or the names of their own children. They engineered an economy where poverty was not merely a lack of material resources, but a literal state of creeping amnesia. To be bankrupt in the Ashen Exchange was to be reduced to a blank slate, a biological automaton devoid of history, emotion, or context, wandering the hypergeometric arcologies without knowing how or why they arrived. The blank obol represents the ultimate, horrifying endpoint of absolute commoditization, a system where the only thing left to sell is the very definition of the self. The catastrophic failure of the Ashen Exchange was not triggered by a market crash, a hyperinflationary spiral, or a foreign invasion. The archaeological record presents a far more insidious apocalypse, when a civilization's primary economic engine demands the systematic amputation of the self. The terminal limit of that market is not the depletion of a natural resource, but the total erasure of the population's consciousness. Through deep penetration ether resonance imaging of the petrified husks crowding the transit corridors, we have uncovered the biological reality of this final bankruptcy. The physical bodies of these citizens are completely undamaged. There are no signs of starvation, trauma, or pathogenic infection. However, their neural architecture, specifically the synaptic pathways responsible for identity, motor function, and autonomic breathing, has been scrubbed entirely smooth. They did not die of biological failure, they simply spent the memory of how to remain alive. I find the absolute silence of this terminal event to be its most haunting feature. The stratigraphy of the megalopolis reveals a quiet, paralyzed end, as the working class systematically surrendered the cognitive foundations to pay for basic survival. The city ground to a halt. We find mechanics frozen in front of pristine, functioning atmospheric scrubbers, having sold the technical knowledge required to operate them. We find parents petrified in their domestic pods, having traded away the neurological capacity to recognize their own kin. The Ashen Exchange did not burn, it simply stopped moving as millions of citizens simultaneously reached a state of absolute, blank inertia. Conversely, the upper administrative spires, the repositories of this vast, stolen wealth, reveal a different, yet equally grotesque fate. The rulers of this hyper-capitalist society did not hoard these memories as inert data. The localized psychic residue in the executive arcologies suggests they consumed the filled obols, augmenting their own consciousness with the harvested experiences of millions. But the biological neural architecture is not designed to support an infinite chorus of competing identities. The ruling elite did not survive the amnesic collapse. They were psychologically obliterated by the sheer, deafening density of the lives they had consumed, rapidly descending into a catatonic fragmentation. Today, the towering arcologies of the Ashen Exchange stand perfectly preserved, an eternal monument to a market that operated with flawless, lethal efficiency. The toll gates are still active. The automated dispensers still offer vital sustenance. But there is no one left to pay the price. The society achieved the ultimate endpoint of absolute commoditization, successfully converting their entire civilization into a frictionless, light-devouring void. As we prepare to engage the magnetic dampeners and plunge this single Blank Obol back into the isolation chamber, we must confront the terrifying mirror it holds up to our own reality. In our relentless pursuit of profit and survival, how many fragments of our own humanity do we willingly surrender at the toll gates of our daily existence? And when the final transaction is complete, what will be left of us to inherit the wealth?